Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, and I welcome you to this webinar with Oded Leshem. My name is Michael Kurtz, and I am a member of AFHU's Board of Directors. And yes, I do thank you for joining us today. What is hope? What are its merits and dangers? How did hope affect human evolution? And what is its role in times of crisis and social unrest? Today, combining philosophical and psychological perspectives, we have the distinct honor to hear from an expert about the depths of hope and its role in addressing the significant socio-political challenges of our time. Following the events of October 7th, our communities have been faced with unprecedented hardship, seemingly never-ending challenges, and societal and communal trauma. However, through it all, we have held hope. Hope is for the safe return of the hostages still held in Gaza. Hope for the safety of Israel and her people. Hope for a better world. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to remind everybody that 2025, the year we're in, marks a momentous milestone as AFHU and HU commemorate 100 years of unwavering partnership. Since the founding of both institutions in 1925, this collaboration has been a beacon of perseverance, solidarity, I'm having trouble with my second language, and transformative support, driving groundbreaking research and enriching educational experiences for generations of students and scholars. We invite you to join us throughout the year as we honor this remarkable legacy with a series of inspiring events. Your participation will help shape the future and ensure that the Hebrew University continues to thrive for the next 100 years and beyond. For those that don't know, you can please visit AFHU's website at afhu.org/centennial. Dr. Oded Leshem is a political psychologist who has been fascinated by the concept of hope for more than a decade. His interest in hope and its absence began in 2012 with his first experimental studies on hope inducement. Since then, he has published numerous articles and book chapters on hope and despair as political phenomena and lectured on hope to a wide range of academic and non-academic audiences. In 2023, he published the book, Hope Amidst Conflict, I did read that, with Oxford University Press. A year later, in 2024, he founded the International Hub for Hope Research at the Hebrew University. This novel research hub is home to senior and junior scholars across disciplines interested in studying hope as a driver of social change. Oded directs the hub and leads its research projects. He was born and raised in Jerusalem and currently resides with his family in Tel Aviv. Oded, it's my pleasure. It's yours.
Thanks so much, Michael, for this introduction, and thank you for inviting me to this talk. It's really an honor to be here and talk about hope in these very difficult times here in Israel, across the world as well. And I want to share my presentation. Hope everyone sees that. Okay. Can you see the presentation itself?
Bring them home now.
Bring them home now, exactly. So every talk that I have, every class that I give, every lecture that I give, I start with the hostages. So first of all, we have here, the beautiful photo of Emily Damari. Emily Damari was one of the first hostages that was released now in this batch. She was released less than a month ago. And this photo was taken several hours after she exited Gaza after 14 months of captivity. and you see her smile and you see her sign with a wounded hand. And that's really a symbol for us for the courage and the resilience and the hope of the hostages. They are really an inspiration for us, and I believe for everyone. And I begin every lecture and talk with this very important cry and demand to release all the hostages. You know, we need it because the hostages themselves are in great danger, and the families, of course, are worried for many, many months. But we also need it for the spirit of Israel and the Jewish people, because these very ideas of Pidyon Shvuim, the mitzvah of bringing back hostages, Kol Israel Arevim זה לזה, Kol HaMatzil Nefesh Achat, every person that is able to rescue even one soul as if he is rescued the whole world. These are foundations of Israeli society, foundations of the Jewish people. And if we must hold this spirit. We must bring them home. I will say, as an expert of public opinion, there is a huge majority in Israel in support for the deal. All the chief security officers in Israel, in the IDF and elsewhere, are in favor of the deal. So I take this opportunity to call for the deal. And of course, this is very much connected to hope, because we are talking about hope in the midst of probably the biggest crisis that Israel has ever been through. And I want to kind of start by saying that I've been exploring hope for many years, for more than a decade, and I've been investigating hope as a philosophical construct. I'm also a quantitative researcher, so I offer a way to measure hope, and I measure hope in conflict zones around the world. I investigate hope as a psychological construct. But many people have asked me since the 7th of October, is it actually appropriate to talk about hope now? Does it make sense to talk about hope in the midst of this great crisis when the hostages are still in captivity? We're still in the midst of a war. As you know, in Israel, there's also a lot of tension within Israel, great distrust in the government, etc. The times are so difficult, also in the US and around the world. Maybe it's not an appropriate time to talk about hope. Maybe we should let things improve a little bit, and then we can talk about hope. But what I've kind of understood from my research, and I think people here will agree with me, that actually hope matters exactly in these times, in the times of hardship, in the times of social unrest. This is when hope really matters. When everything is good in our life, right? When we know where the future is taking us, the influence of hope or the importance of hope is marginal. But in times of crisis, in times of hardship, this is when hope becomes really meaningful and sometimes even critical. And many times I give this example of a small light from a candle flame. If you take a small candle in a well-lit room, it doesn't really influence the light, right? Its contribution to the light is very, very marginal. But as the room becomes darker, suddenly this tiny light from this tiny candle flame becomes meaningful, becomes significant, becomes even critical. In fact, when the room is completely dark, this is when the small light from the candle flame becomes most significant and most important. And hope functions for people in a very, very similar way. So it's really appropriate to talk about hope and understand hope now, I think, in the midst of these challenging times. Now, one of the assignments I give to my students on the first class, I say to them, if you could visualize hope, what would it look like? So hope is an abstract concept, of course, but if we could give it some form or some image, what would this image be? And many students and other participants, they draw sunrises, they draw rainbows, really colorful pictures associated with happiness and with joy. And that really makes sense because intuitively we tie hope to positive things like happiness and joy, etc. But I want to show you a picture, a really beautiful and interesting picture painted by George Watts. George Watts was a British painter from the late 19th century. In June, I was in London. I went to the Tate Museum to see the original painting. It's very, very impressive. And this painting is called Hope. Now, it's not very joyous. It's quite melancholic, actually. And we see there is a female figure, and she is sitting on a globe, and the globe is almost drowning. So there is certainly a sense of hazard here, of danger here. And as you see, her eyes are covered. So she doesn't really know where the future is taking her. And indeed, hope is always tied to uncertainty. When we know, we don't need hope. We need hope when we don't know. We need hope in times of uncertainty when the future is unpredictable. And she's playing on this very shabby looking broken harp that has only one string left, if you could notice. All the other strings are torn. And she's plucking on this string and she's trying to listen to the soft note from the only string left from this broken harp with her eyes covered when the globe is almost sinking. And this is hope, right? So in one way we could understand hope is this very unique human ability to cling to even the slightest positive signal in times of hardship, in times of distress, when things look like they're falling apart. And this melancholic view of hope is very important because one of the things that I try to do in my research is I try to de-romanticize hope. Many times we use hope as a slogan, right? We say, we must keep hope. Let's believe that everything will be all right. Trust me, it's going to be okay. And we call that hope. But hope is a much deeper concept, both psychologically, the way it works in our brain, and also philosophically in terms of its meaning in our life. And in fact, most of the philosophers, both ancient Greek philosophers and postmodern philosophers, didn't talk about the good sides of hope. They talked about the bad sides of hope. They talked about the disadvantages of hope and the dangers of hope. And it's very important to know these dangers so we could understand hope in its fullest concept. So, for example, Nietzsche, right, not a very optimistic guy for sure, he said, hope is the worst of all evils. It's the worst of all evils because it prolongs man's suffering. And indeed, that makes sense because when we're hopeful for something, when we hope, when we desire something, when we have these aspirations and hopes, we're usually very anxious, right? There is some anxiety accompanied, right? That comes together with hope. Skeptical people, pessimists, they don't have this anxiety, right? They assume that things are not going to go well, and so they're not anxious. But hopeful people are anxious people, right? And so indeed, hope many times comes with anxiety, comes with pain, comes with suffering sometimes. Let's think about the families of the hostages. They're hoping to see their loved ones. We can't imagine the magnitude of their hope. It's so strong, right? Their desires and aspirations to see their loved ones is so strong. But it's not easy. It's a burden, this hope to see your loved ones every day, waking up after so much time. And having and holding this hope is quite a challenge and a burden. So we also need to understand that hope comes with anxiety and with suffering. And many times, of course, with frustration because our hopes could be dashed. And then kind of another strand of work says Hope comes with ignorance. Hope is for the foolish. This is Spinoza, this is Descartes. Descartes says, what is hope? It's this tendency or disposition of our mind to believe that our wishes will come true. Who said our wishes would come true? Who gives us this um, certainty? No one. And this is kind of a disposition, a bias that we believe that what we want will actually materialize. And of course, that doesn't happen in life. So they tie hope with ignorance. Spinoza and others said, the aim and main purpose of man is knowledge. We need to acquire knowledge. We need to strive for knowledge, not hope. We can't base our decisions on hope. We need to base on decisions on knowledge. So we need to avoid hope as much as possible and pursue knowledge and pursue facts. And in fact, when you come to think about it, hope could lead us to being naive. Hope could lead us, for example, to kind of dismiss challenges that lie ahead. Hope could lead us to paint reality in rosy colors just because we want something badly. We kind of dismiss the challenges, paint reality in rosy colors. And this is, of course, a big problem. And so this is this kind of point that hope could come with this being naive, being ignorant, being foolish, etc. And lastly, very interesting, hope is very, very demanding. And it's demanding in two ways. First of all, it's demanding in terms of the mental energy it requires. We know from neuropsychology that hope is a very elaborate mental process. We need to envision a future, we need to envision a better future, we need to envision ways to get there. That's a lot of mental processing. That's a lot of mental energy. And you know that our brains like to be lazy, right? So hope is really like that's a lot of work, right? If you're skeptical, you don't need to work that much. And also, as we know, fear, for example, is very automatic. Fear requires very little mental energy. So compared to hope, many times people prefer fear to hope because it requires a lot of mental work. But it's also demanding in terms of the behavioral commitment, right? When people hope for something, we expect them to devote time and energy and thought and money to pursue their goals, to pursue their hopes. So it's very, very demanding, right? We like to be lazy. So if you are skeptical or pessimist, you could be lazy, right? You could sit easily on your chair and do nothing whatsoever because you say, no, it's not going to work. It's the hopeful people that need to also invest time, invest energy. And so hope is very demanding. It requires a lot of commitment. And that's actually another disadvantage, right? Because we need to really to invest in hope. And these are three kind of disadvantages. I also want to kind of say that very interestingly, hope is very culturally dependent, or the value of hope is very culturally dependent. So in Western cultures, certainly in modern, postmodern cultures, we really value hope, right? Our culture encourages us to aspire for the impossible and believe that we could do it, right? Think about all the movies, all the books, that kind of the main theme is this person that had hopes for, something that was considered impossible, but against all odds, this person succeeded in achieving this. So we really kind of value these people's hopes, right? Hope for the impossible, for the unachievable. But other cultures are much more modest or encourages us to be much more modest about the future. Kind of decrease your aspirations a little bit, decrease, the belief you could achieve them. And this is much more favored in several cultures. And in fact, we also see it in religions. In what we call linear religions, which are, for example, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, are linear religions in a sense that they perceive time as linear, right, as history. There is past, there is present, and there is future. And God Almighty kind of takes us through this journey. So in these types of religions, we see hope as a central theme. But religions that are more circular, that go in circles, right? Like Hinduism and Buddhism, we don't see hope as a salient theme in the scriptures of these types of religions. So hope is both culturally dependent, it depends on religion, and we shouldn't take it for granted. So now that I talked all about the dangers and the downsides of hope, I hope I convinced you that hope is an awful thing we should all avoid. Thanks a lot for joining the webinar, and avoid hope as much as possible. Yeah, of course, this is a joke, and the reason I'm always saying this is that I really believe we need to know and kind of acknowledge the pitfalls of hope and the downsides of hope if we want to work with hope effectively. So, going from the dangers of hope to the merits of hope and the powers of hope, we could say, I think, several things that are really kind of point to how essential hope is for people. So first of all, we could really kind of understand hope as an existential human need, something we could not live without, like water, like food, like sleep. And I think the best example is Viktor Frankl's Hope's Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl, right, Holocaust survivor, talked about meaning and hope in the death camps, in the concentration camps, in the most, dire and dreadful situations of man. He talked about hope. And what he wrote very explicitly is that he observed that prisoners that had hope, even the slightest hope for a small piece of bread, or big hopes to be, liberated and see their families again, those people had at least the ability to survive. But the people that kind of abandoned hope didn't have a chance, didn't have a chance. So, really, from his observation, is this idea that hope is something existential, that we need, that humans cling to it in the darkest situations. And we know it also, and I'll talk later at the end of the presentation, I'll talk about a really unique project that we want to launch with hostages that came back and explore hope in captivity. But we know that hope is really essential for human survival. But even if we take kind of a bird's eyes view of evolution of humanity, we can say that the evolution of man is in many ways due to people's hope for well-being, for improving their lives. So for example, Ernst Bloch said, everything we see around us, every human achievement is hope driven. Everything we see around us was driven by hope. All of humans' technological advancements, all of humans' social advancements are hope driven. So, for example, we're not supposed to fly, right? We don't have wings. Humans don't have wings. So, under no circumstances whatsoever, we're supposed to fly and reach the skies. But humans have looked to the skies and to the clouds and to the stars and to the moon, and their hopes to fly and touch the skies and reach space have made it such, their hopes, right, their aspirations and their dreams to do it, had made them such that they provided the technology that made this transpire. And so humans hope for technological advancement is, they failed and they failed and they failed, but then they made it happen, right? And the same thing you could say about democracy, for example. So what is democracy? Humans lived under totalitarian regimes for centuries. But their hopes to construct some better social contract between people, structure that is better for everyone, that is equal for everyone, that provides freedom for everyone, is, and their struggle to do it with many, many failures have made democracy at the end materialize. Now, of course, we're seeing what we call now in political science, we are seeing democratic backlash. We see democracy kind of fading in many, many places in the world. This is true in the US, certainly true in Israel, in other places in the world. Democracy is under threat, no doubt. But this idea of people saying, no, we are not willing to live under social structures that are oppressive, uh, is eventually is what made these things and what will make these things succeed, right? So we could say that what we see around us is hope driven. And by the way, it doesn't matter if this hope is anchored in human ability or the ability of God Almighty, it doesn't really matter. The idea that the future could be better and should be better is what makes humans advance. And lastly, we actually see in empirical data, we see that there are positive objective outcomes of hope. So we could measure people's hope and then correlate it and experiment with that and see if that actually matters. And we see that hope for people have better academic achievements, have better athletic achievements, they actually live longer. So there is a study done in the 70s and the 80s, measured people's hope on all sorts of domains, hope for well-being, hope for health, hope for career, hope for family, etc. And they saw that these people, the people that scored higher on the hope scales in the 70s and 80s, actually lived longer into their 80s, etc. So there is also a connection between hope and longer life. And so what I try to do, one of the things that I try to do is in my studies, is try to what I call optimize hope. What is to optimize hope is to try to take advantage of all the benefits of hope that we see here, while trying to avoid or minimizing the effects of the drawbacks that we talked about earlier, right? And in this sense, optimal hope is a hope that magnifies the merits of hope and tries to diminish as much as possible the downsides and the drawbacks of hope. And we'll talk about optimal hope at the end of the talk today. So I talked about what's good and bad about hope, but I didn't say what hope is. And you know what we do best? What do we do best, researchers? We disagree, right? So researchers, the best thing they know how to do is disagree. We never agree on anything. And so there are some hope scholars that conceptualize hope as an emotion. Others look at it as a cognitive construct. Others look at it as a behavioral component. We won't go into that. I will say that what I did in my studies is I went back to popular dictionaries, to general dictionaries in many languages. And what I found is a very straightforward and simple definition. What is hope? It's a desire accompanied by an expectation of fulfillment. So, you don't need a PhD to come up with this definition. It's quite simple. But if we go one step further and into this definition, we'll actually see that there are two components here, which are very, very different. The first is the desire, right? So hope requires this desire, aspiration, the will, the dream, you might say, right? And this is one thing. And people could differ on this component. Some people want things very, very badly, and some people want the same thing to a lesser extent. And the second component is the expectation, this assessment of possibility, right? What are the chances? So hope is always tied to both this desire, aspiration, wish component, and to the expectation component. And what I show in my studies is that these two components, the wish to attain a goal, right? The wish, the desire to attain a goal, and the expectation that this goal could be attained, are actually the two necessary and sufficient components of hope. So we need them both, but we don't need anything more, right? And I'll give you an example, and if I may, I want to share something a bit personal. I have to admit that I want to be an astronaut. I've been wanting to be an astronaut since the age of 3. I've been looking in books about spaceships and about the stars for a long, long time. I love these very cool suits that the astronauts have. So I could certainly say that I wish and I have great desires and hopes in that regard to be an astronaut. But the fact that I'm working at the Hebrew University and I have no experience in flying a spaceship, I think that really decreases my expectations and my chances that I'll ever be admitted to a NASA program. I also hate flying and I'm afraid of heights actually, so it won't really help me. So I could say that even though I wish to be an astronaut, the fact that I have no expectation actually nullifies my hope, right? I can't say I have hope to be an astronaut because there's no chance, right? So when the expectation is zero, hope is nullified. I'll give you another example. Let's say I park in a no parking zone, and I see some person from the municipality giving out parking tickets, and I see this person coming to the car. So I could certainly expect to get a parking ticket, right? But I can't say I hope to get a parking ticket because my wishes are zero. I certainly don't have no desires to pay the penalty. So here, even though I have great expectations, right, and I know I'm going to get a parking ticket, the fact that the wishes are zero nullifies my hope as well. So I need both wishes and expectations. And in fact, hope is this interplay between people's desires, wishes, and their expectation that these desires will come about. And the problem is that the word hope in many languages is very confusing. So I'll give you an example. A good friend of mine told me, I really hope that there will be peace in the Middle East, but I have no hope that there will be peace. How can you say you have no hope? You just say you really hope. But of course, when we think about this sentence again, we could say, okay, my friend told me she really hopes for peace, meaning she desires, aspires, she has great wishes that peace will happen, but she has little hope, meaning she thinks that the chances are very slim. So this is the expectation dimension. And indeed, in many languages, sometimes we use the word hope to signify our wishes and dreams. And sometimes we use hope to signify our assessment of possibility or expectations. That makes it very problematic to measure hope. If people refer to hope in different ways, how could we measure hope? So what I offer in my research, and actually the model that I offer to understand hope, is what's called the bidimensional model of hope. That means that instead of looking at hope as a unidimensional construct, that either I could be low or high on hope, I have low hopes or high hopes. No, we don't look at hope like that. We look at hope as something that has two dimensions. And the two dimensions are, the first one is the wish dimension here on the y-axis, right? And the higher I'm on the y-axis, on this wish dimension, the more I hope for something, in a sense that the more I want it, the more it's important for me, the more I desire it, aspire for it. That's the dream dimension. And the second dimension on the x-axis is the expectation dimension. And this refers to my assessment of possibility, like what are the chances? And the higher I'm on the expectation dimension, the higher my hopes, because I assess the possibility of this thing as high. And so we could look at hope as something that is actually kind of marked on a bidimensional area, on a plane. In the left lower corner here, I don't know if you see my cursor here, people don't have hope. There's no hope here because this is something unimportant for me. I'm totally indifferent to it. I don't desire it at all. And I also think it's impossible. Okay, so there's no hope. But as I go to the upper right corner, this is where hope increases, both because these are things that I hope for more in a sense that I desire them and aspire for them. And also, I think they have more chances to materialize. Right? Here, by the way, on the edge, that we don't have hope because this is certainty. When the expectations are 100%, when I know something is going to happen, I don't need hope. There's no hope, right? But hope is all around here. And the places are really different. The most interesting place of hope is this part. This is the part when we want something badly, when we aspire for something and we need it very much, like bringing back the hostages, like ending the war, like, struggling for social well-being, etc. But the chances would be very, very low. This is a really interesting place of hope. And this is also true if we take it to the personal level. So we all hope to be healthy, right? But people who have severe illness, their hopes in the desire dimension, in the wish dimensions are higher, right? They feel awful. And so their wishes and desires and aspirations for recovery are higher. But sometimes their expectations are lower because the chances for being feeling well sometimes become lower as the illness becomes more severe. So this is certainly the interesting part of hope, and this is the part of hope when that I focus on. I see that I don't have a lot of time, so I will talk about, I think, two parts. All right. I will first ask this question: is hope necessarily action oriented? So most philosophers agree that hope is tied to action. There is no such thing as idle hope. This is Erich Fromm, one of the most important philosophers who talked about hope. There's no such thing as idle hope. If you're sitting on your chair and you're saying, yes, I hope for something, but you don't do anything about it, that's not hope. That could be, we could call it something else. But hope is always tied to action. And we see also empirical evidence that tie hope to activity and behavior. And then another question is like, what is the difference between optimism and hope? And we could answer that question by looking at the statement before. Rick Snyder, one of the most important scholars of hope, said, optimism is hope minus a plan. So hope is you want something, you believe it is possible, but you could be optimistic but passive. Okay? You can't be hopeful and passive. All right. So I'm going to skip a little bit because we have little time, and I'm going to talk about optimal hope. And my suggestion is this, that, we have hope is built on two dimensions, right? The wish dimension and the expectation dimensions, and both are important. But we see from empirical kind of evidence that the wish dimension, the dream dimension, is a bit more important. It has more predictive power on all sorts of outcomes. So if we shift our attention to the wish dimension or to our dreams, rather than trying to think about the assessment of possibility, we start to kind of get into this optimal hope region. And what is optimal hope? So optimal hope is more sustainable because when we shift our emphasis to our dreams and desires and know how to articulate them clearly and know how to focus on them, and we kind of decrease the weight on the assessment of possibility, we get hope that is more durable in the face of obstacles, right? Because it's leaning more on the wish dimension. We also get, interestingly enough, we also get a more realistic type of hope. Because many times when we count too much on the chances of possibility, on the expectation dimension, we are afraid to look at the challenges ahead. We are afraid that our hopes are going to be dashed because there are a lot of obstacles and challenges. But if we put our weight more on the wish dimension, we have the courage to look at reality and not color it in pink colors. And this is very important because think about all the great achievements of people. Many times I give this kind of example of Zionism, or other social struggles that were against the odds. So what will happen if the people, the first Zionists will think, what are our chances to build a homeland for the Jewish people? Nothing. There were no chances. But many of people's achievements were despite the low chances, right? Despite the odds. And this is true for many, many things that people achieved. And because they were more kind of focusing on the wish dimension. And the last component of optimal hope is action. And one of the magical aspects of hope is the connection between hope and activity. So, of course, it's kind of intuitive to think when we hope for something, it generates action, right? We want something, we think we could achieve it, and that actually the consequence is some sort of action. But the magic of hope is that it also works the other way around. When we are active in something, when we are involved, when we volunteer, when we are engaged, usually with other people, suddenly we feel hope, right? And this hope is because in many ways, we kind of summon the future to the present. We kind of see our dream in the present. We see the people that we work with. We see our aims. We see it in front of us. It might be a small slice of it, but it's still what we want to achieve. We see it in the present. So action also generates hope. And so optimal hope is always tied to action because we're active, it generates hope, and then it generates action again. Okay, so and we want to be there. We want to be in a place where our hope is very active. So a big question is, where could we see hope now? Right now in this, in the midst of crisis. And I want to suggest that university and higher learning and higher education is a place of hope, is a hope-driven idea. Both because research is what's advancing us to the future. With research, we could advance humans, technological achievements, social achievements, all achievements are now research, driven, but also because we invest in the students, right? What are the students? The students are the future. So higher learning in university is very hope oriented. And the Hebrew University, along with other universities in Israel, really, I think, symbolize hope in the last 2 years. First of all, because the Hebrew University, together with other universities, really stood up for Israel's democracy and took a stand there and to strengthen democracy and democratic values while they were threatened. But also on the 7th of October, when the war started, the university was closed because most of the students and faculty were enlisted. And so the contribution of the university to the home front and the battlefront was very, very significant. While that was happening, the Hebrew University was also very minded to keep the university a safe place for Arab and Palestinian students as well. So I was teaching a class where I had reserve soldiers, coming with their uniform and Palestinian students from East Jerusalem. And we managed, together with the backing of the university, to keep the environment positive as much as possible, welcoming, safe, etc. So really, really a beacon of hope. This is true for many universities, but I could say for the Hebrew University as well. And I want to take kind of the last minutes. I know I'm a bit over time, but I want to take the last minutes to talk about kind of my own baby that I started just several months ago. It's called the International Hub for Hope Research at the Hebrew University. And we have kind of two main goals. We want to be the international go-to center for hope-related research and really lead the global aspiration of hope as a driver for social change. So this is the only place, the only research center in the world that looks at hope as a social and political phenomenon and tries to understand hope in social and political context. But we also want to take this knowledge and provide evidence-based data to strengthen and advance equality, democracy, conflict resolution, and other values that we hold dear. So this is a really kind of a new place. And the first cohort of the students, the semester was just closed 2 weeks ago. So this is the first cohort of the graduate students of the Research Hub. Just a little bit about them. On the left with the black jacket, this is Gil Dickman. He's the nephew of Carmel Gat, one of the hostages that was murdered in the beginning of September while in captivity. And he uses and tries to use hope research to advance campaigns that support the release of the hostages in Israel and abroad. So he's taking hope knowledge and turning it to campaigns that support the release of the hostages. Sitting and kneeling with a white sweater, this is Rawan Jaber, Arab student of mine, super talented. She runs the Hope Map Project, which is a global project that measures hope for peace in conflict zones around the world. So she takes hope knowledge and uses it to measure and understand hope in conflicts. And then Shayuz, this is a redhead, three persons from the right. She is from Re'im kibbutz, the kibbutz Re'im, which was attacked on the 7th of October on the Gaza envelope. And she is doing her PhD project on hope and resilience among the people of the Otef, among the people who live in the envelope, in the Gaza envelope. And last but not least, Matt Shapiro on the right. He's an international student, an American student, did his bachelor's in Brandeis, if I'm not mistaken, and he's doing cultural aspects of hope. Really, really interesting group, super talented, and this is kind of the future of the hub. So I just wanted you to meet them because I put my hopes in them. And this international hub is for hope research is really kind of building its way right now. And we're looking for partners and supporters and sponsors and other collaborators on this project. So now is the time for answers and for questions. And I think I'm 3 minutes over time, so sorry.
Thank you very much, Dr. Leshem. Hi, everyone. My name is Shai. I work for the Hebrew University's Division of Advancement and External Relations. I'm coming to you live from Israel, from Jerusalem, and I'll be moderating the Q&A part of this webinar. So, Dr. Leshem, thank you very much, first of all, for this riveting and very hopeful talk that you just gave. We have a number of questions that came up. Some of them range from political, some of them actually more religious, philosophical. So without further ado, I'd like to just dive in. So
maybe we need 3-4 hours.
Yeah, we actually 4 or 5 even, but this is a very heavy, but this is
Fun
very
to do a semester in Jerusalem and study.
Sure. So let's see. So one of the first questions that I think popped up is relating to the families of the hostages. So how do you think receiving a sign of life from the hostages in Gaza, how does it affect the hope of their families? Is it supporting? Does it strengthen their hope? Does it provide renewed resilience, or does it complicate things for them?
So that's a great question, because we know that for the families back here, any sign either of life or something else, really, it's like a roller coaster of hope, right? You go from extreme hope to really deep despair. I think one of the things that really keeps hope very central to these families is the headquarters of families. So this is the forum of where all the families really support each other, both the people who already returned and the people who are already there. There's huge support. And the second thing is the public support. When you go to the rallies that support the hostages, the members of the families come and say, you are the people who are bringing us hope. You are the ones that help us endure this pain day after day. So the public support is crucial. People are saying, we are with you. You are not alone. And this is tiny because, of course, they're thinking about their loved ones and the chances that they get back. But the little we can contribute by supporting them, I know from them that it is very, very meaningful. So I don't know, maybe it's just a partial answer, but this is perhaps something that we could do these times.
So that actually brings me to another question that we've been asked here in the chat. So you mentioned that as an example that a Hebrew University is a place where we can find hope. So the question is, for people who don't go to the university, where else can we find hope?
So, that's a great question. And university is just an example of community. We're social beings, and the most important thing for our survival is close social circles. It could be family, it could be community, congregation, it could be our religious community, or just the neighborhood. But certainly we see that in times of hardship and calamity, people cling together, right? So this is perhaps one thing that I could say. And another thing is that it really depends on something you're active in. So if you're engaged in something, if you volunteer in something, that's really crucial. What did I do in the first 3 weeks of October, throughout October? I volunteered. Now, I'm not the only one. Almost all the Israeli population engaged in hundreds of volunteering initiatives, hundreds. Driving soldiers to their bases, hosting evacuees, working in agriculture, packing food and everything, okay? And you see what happens when you are engaged. You suddenly feel hope. Now, that doesn't make sense. The bombs are flying over our head, the missiles are flying, we're running to the shelter. We know how dreadful the situation is, and we feel hope. Why is that? We feel hope because suddenly we understand, this is what it's all about. The social solidarity and the social glue between people, that people are willing to put everything aside and volunteer and sometimes risk their lives for other people. This is really hope. It inspires hope. Okay, so any activity, any volunteering is really something that does this. And by the way, I'm comparing it to people. There were others who were so shocked. All they did was look at the news, and the social media and sat on their couches and say how horrific it is. They couldn't manage, right? And they felt lousy and they felt desperate. And the people who hoped did two things. First, they helped other people, and they helped themselves also. Right? So this is really maybe a little advice that I could give.
Okay, thank you. And another question, I think it kind of relates to what you were just talking about. Can you share your thoughts on the cultural aspects of hope? Meaning, are there cultures where hope is more encouraged story, or more discouraged, maybe?
Yeah, so I started to talk about it, and I wouldn't say that hope is discouraged, but we live in an age where we value hope so much, right? We
Oh, you're back.
kind of um, admire people who hope for the impossible, right? We admire them. But there are other cultures who kind of encourage us to be a bit more modest about the things we should aspire to achieve and our chances, right? There are two components, two dimensions. So how much we should want something and how much we believe we could materialize it. And so there is a cultural difference here. So Asian cultures, we see hope as a theme that is not as salient as in Western cultures. So in Western cultures, certainly current modern cultures, hope is a much more salient theme than in Asian cultures. But I want to say I will use this opportunity to talk about hope in the Jewish scriptures. So, for example, hope appears, the root hope appears 77 times in the Bible. And the book that it appears most frequently is the book of Job. Right? The book of immense suffering and pain, right? Of loss and bereavement. And this is the book that hope is, mentioned the most. So first of all, this ties us again. Hope and suffering, hope comes with pain, right? When everything is fine and dandy, we don't need hope. We need hope in times of distress. And this is one thing. And the second interesting thing is that the root of tikva is like the root of mikveh, a reservoir of water. And so this idea that hope is also a reservoir, or let's say a mental or spiritual reservoir of people, is something that is very tied together. And the Bible does a beautiful work of connecting reservoir, the more physical thing of a water reservoir, and the hope as a reservoir into the mental or spiritual reservoir. So again, I'm glitching a little bit, but hope that helps.
Sure, but you know what? Why don't we stay on the more religious aspect of this Q&A? So one question we got was, you mentioned that Judaism and Islam and Christianity are more not really circular religions, but they have the same aspect, if you will, when it comes to hope. So how does Judaism's hope fit between, Islam's fighting against the infidels, or the part of Islam talking about fighting the infidels, and the part of Christianity hoping that, all people in the world will convert to Christianity, essentially? So how does the Jewish hope fit into this?
Right. This is a good question. It also really relates to what we see around us, even here in Israel. So you could definitely say that the hopes of Jewish people around the world today, are not the same.
Mm-hmm.
There are some people that, when for them, the most beautiful and desired future is a world where Judaism is living alongside other religions, is not at the expense of other beliefs and ethnicities, where there is an opening for all sorts of ways to worship the Jewish God, etc. Right? So this is a more progressive or modern kind of vision of Judaism. And there is a Judaism right now which is more extreme, which is exclusive, which has a very kind of dominant view about equality, about women's rights, etc. And there are two visions, and they are struggling. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is not new in the history of the Israelites. Israelites have been struggling sometimes against each other for different types of views of the future. So hope, I think that's a great point, because hope in its sense is neither good or bad, right? It depends what you hope for. Sometimes people could hope for eliminating other people, right? We don't want that type of hope, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you could hope for, bad things, you could hope for good things. And, if I want to kind of remain in a positive tone, I think that at the end, humanity is progressing in a certain way. We go backwards, etc. But it is progressing in a way that is more inclusive, that encourages partnership and collaborations across divides. And right now we don't see it. There's war around us, and there's tensions and there are collisions. But humans have, kind of endured these very difficult times and made it such that a vision of larger human cooperation could actually transpire. So this is my personal hope, and I think many here share this as well.
So I think we have time for one last question. Actually, it's a question that I was thinking about as you were giving the talk. Is it possible for hope to be hijacked by extremism? Meaning that when people are in times of despair and they're looking for a solution, they're hopeful for something, then comes along someone who's very extremist and they offer these solutions. Can it actually happen?
First of all, of course, right? If there is a vacuum and someone provides some positive vision, it could really allure people. But I also want to talk about despair. Despair is also very, very dangerous, because sometimes regimes want to keep people in a state of despair, in a state of constant frustration. And when people are desperate, they do violence. Many times the consequence is violence, and violence not in a sense to achieve something, violence for the sake of violence, violence for the sake of hurting another, a person revenge, for example, right?
Was
Revenge
that the
doesn't.
case in the Warsaw Ghetto, for example, in Warsaw Ghetto uprising? Was that the case?
I don't think so, by the way. So
Hmm.
sometimes people know how to fight against, and they know they don't have the chance, right? But they're struggling for some sort of values, right?
Hmm.
Or honor. But I'm talking about places, where the members of society are under such oppression by the regime or by other places that people are so desperate, they will
Hmm.
do, they will hurt and revenge, even though they know that nothing could come out of it. And so I would say that, so maybe two conclusions here. One, we need hope. We don't want to keep people desperate. And the second, we want this hope to have, values of human dignity, human partnership and cooperation as much as possible. It's hard, of course,
Hmm.
right? But this is at least our hopes.
With that hopeful tone, I think this is all the time we have for questions. So, Michael, I'll give the floor to you for closing remarks. Thank you very much, Dr. Leshem.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Shai. Thank you for joining us. I see we had quite a substantial group. This does conclude our presentation. Everything comes to an end, including good things. But this does conclude our presentation of hope and its role in times of crisis and social unrest with Dr. Oded Leshem. Feel free to contact him for more information on his work. Don't hesitate to do that or ask your questions. And to learn more about Israel's premier university, you get the gist of higher learning and innovation, and to find out how you can become part of AFHU and its mission to support HU, please visit the website afhu.org, which I do frequently. And we really, from our heart, we thank you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Oded. And thank you, Shai.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks so much for this.
Thanks, everybody. Be well.